everybody, welcome back to my channel, it's Gio. Now today I wanted to talk about some of my thoughts about the upcoming plans for the North American Tier 2 scene in Rainbow Six. Now they have pretty much just released all of the information about the US division and the Canada division. They've basically just about an hour ago released all the information about the North American future of Siege esports, and that of course includes information about Tier 2. Now of course we don't yet know what the plans are for Europe, APAC and Latin America. We've got to wait till later on this month until that information becomes available to us, but for now I want to have a look at what these plans are for NA Challenger League and the general Tier 2 scene, and just have a little bit of a talk about it because I think it looks quite promising, and I think some of my experience in other esports potentially lead to some of those opinions. I thought it'd be interesting to discuss. Firstly, what are the changes? Well, you can go and look at the blog post that Ubisoft did release, and I'm sure at this point there's been a lot of conversation already about what it is that's going on. But to summarize, essentially Challenger League is going to keep going kind of as normal. There are going to be different stages throughout the year. The year will consist of one season and each year will have 3 stages, although in 2020 I believe there's only going to be 2 stages. And throughout that year there will be opportunities for teams to be promoted and relegated. So obviously, even though the LAN League is going to be in place, this is not going to be a franchise league, and I think that is a very important distinction to make that I will come back to later, because the health of a Tier 2 system so far in franchise leagues, from what we have seen, has not necessarily been done super well, but I think a lot of people have a wrong idea as to why that is. And I think there are certain ideas that Ubisoft have towards their Tier 2 scene that give me the impression that this should be a relatively healthy way of doing things. So as I said, at the end of certain stages there will be opportunities for teams to go up, or the top teams in Challenger League to go up against the bottom teams in their respective divisions, whether that's the US or Canada, to be able to promo or relegate into whichever league it is. So there still is that opportunity for flexibility for players to traverse between the various tiers, and that's very, very important, because the second you kind of have a lockdown where teams or players can't make that, that's where things start to get stale. And I think it's especially important that they've implemented stages into their Tier 2 scene, because if you just have a year-long season and you have only one opportunity ever for movement to be made, that's where you start to get that stale feeling growing within the scene, and players don't want to wait that long. What's also really important about it is that per season, this is almost verbatim, but per season, opportunities for 2 open qualified teams to enter per stage. So that means that Tier 3 players will have multiple chances to break into Challenger League per stage. And it's really important that you have these overlaps, these kind of Venn diagrams across the various tiers that allow for that kind of professional mobility. That's what's going to keep people in the scene invested, thinking there's a chance for them, a reason to grind, a reason to work, and that's where you're going to get these stories that people become invested in. You're not just going to be seeing the same faces with no reason to fight, and therefore the skill ceiling not growing but staying stagnant, or even worse, potentially declining. So that's really important. Now, something that Ubisoft did say in the blog post which really stood out to me is, we believe there's a story to be told amongst all of our semi-pro teams. Now, I made a Twitter thread about this particular point, and I'm going to read that out here because I think this is a really key reason why we should kind of trust Ubisoft with what's going on. So here's my thread. I said, I want to also touch on one of the best things Ubisoft said about the Tier 2 scene, which will likely get overlooked. Each semi-pro team has a story worth telling. Why is this important? In Tier 2, the most important aspect is to tell the stories of the players and raise them. In Tier 2, players are vying for spots in Tier 1. That's their entire grind. And of course, it's fantastic if you make it there as a team, but there's also the chance to get there as an individual. Telling the players' stories gets people invested. It makes them want them. If you're a player who stands out because you're good, because you have a great story to tell, a redemption arc, a long grind, or a short rise to the top, you will be more wanted. Skill is great, but desirability is paramount. Tier 2 can help build that, and Ubi know it. Do not take for granted that we have a developer who know this and want to nurture it. That's a great sign moving into the next era of Tier 2 Siege. That's a huge optimistic green light. A healthy Tier 2 scene is hugely important, and it sounds like Ubi get it. That's awesome. Now, one thing that I didn't really touch on too much in this thread is what I mean by individuals being able to grow. Obviously, you can be promoted or relegated, you can have these movements of teams, but teams can also choose to pick up players at various times in the season, and they can choose to pick you up from your tier 2 team and bring you to the tier 1 team that they have. We see that happen all the time. And having a great story being raised, being brought about by the broadcast talent, by the way you play, the way you present yourself online is really, really important. Now, how does this actually relate to anything that's going on here? The fact that Ubisoft are committing to regular Challenge League broadcasts, which is not something we have in North America right now. It's been done fairly well in Europe. We have had both the official streams, the Rainbow Six UK and of course the main Rainbow Six channel, be used for the European Challenger League Season 11 and also past ones to deliver those broadcasts, but that's not been the case in North America. Being able to have this change is going to be really, really important, and that does bring about more investment, more interest in these tier 2 players, and an investment and interest in tier 2 is what keeps tier 2 alive. In other esports where there are constant arguments over whether tier 2 is being treated well, being treated poorly, alive, dead, whatever it is, one of the biggest things that comes up is, well, why do people care? The onus is on the publisher or whoever is looking after the scene, in this case it is the publisher, to ensure that people are invested. And having the tier 2 scene so inherently interwoven with the tier 1 scene here in NA, and also having those regular broadcasts, is going to be huge on maintaining that investment. Because no more is tier 1 kind of going to be treated as its own independent thing, but you have all these very tightly entangled different leagues from tier 3 all the way up to tier 1, different things they're fighting for, because you're obviously going for those global points to maybe make it to SI. There are going to be the live events, the NA Major, the EU Major going on throughout the year. You have the finals of the US division and the Canada division at the end of the year. All of these different events and different things you're fighting for, which do bring and consolidate the tier 1 and tier 2 scenes. And being able to do that is a huge, huge benefit to ensuring there is that investment and interest in tier 2. And the fact that Ubisoft are aware of that is massive. Some of you may know, some of you may not. I come from the Overwatch scene. That is where my esports journey began, and the Overwatch tier 2 scene is very controversial, especially right now. Blizzard have handled the tier 2 scene in Overwatch differently over the last few years. Overwatch Contenders did begin in 2017, if I remember correctly, but I wasn't around then. 2018 was when I first started watching, and there are some similarities and parallels to how the 2018 Overwatch Contenders season was handled compared to how it's looking like this NA one's going to be doing, i.e. they're going to be these 2 groups of 4 in each thing, and then only at the end in the finals do the best teams from those 2 groups of 4 go up against each other to find out who's going to win. One of the big problems that consistently comes up in Overwatch tier 2, well, there's a few, but the very big fact about Overwatch is it's a franchise league. The Overwatch League is handled in a franchised way. That means there isn't that direct promo and relegation, but a lot of people think that that is the primary reason that tier 2 is an issue. Indirectly, it kind of is. It's the way that branding works in it, but what it means is that there is not so much investment in the tier 2 scene in Overwatch, and I think this is where there is a huge difference here, because in Siege, essentially it's going to all be part of the same thing. It is part of the NA division, the US division or the Canada division, whichever one it is very, very much embedded in it rather than a separate thing. That means that there is going to be this investment. Ubisoft have now pledged that they're going to invest in regular broadcasts. That means that there's going to be paid producers, paid casters, paid whatever. It's going to be a high quality thing, and it's all going to be part of the same ecosystem, and that's a massive, massive difference. Now, a point of criticism, not criticism, I don't know, a point of question mark that I do have is how they plan to implement these single elimination brackets. The thing with single elimination is it allows for flukes to happen. Now, of course, the double elimination bracket that will be going forward in the Challenger League is a lot more robust, where they split the 8 teams into 2 groups of 4. That's way better. Now, of course, there is the fact that in the single elimination bracket, when narrowing down to the final 8 teams, they are planning to have it as best of threes. So you could argue that the best of three format does eliminate some of that fluke nature of things where, you know, if you're just going to have some random game that you do well in, well, you've got to play up to 3 games against a team to prove that you're good enough. So I suppose if it's a time constraint sort of thing, you could argue that, okay, we either have the best of 3 single elim bracket or a best of 1 double elim bracket. I don't personally know if there's loads in it, but I do know that in general I prefer double elim to single elim. I think it's a much better format and a lot more robust format for these sorts of things, but I can also understand why they might not necessarily have the facilities to be able to have a best of 3 double elim format. It does, however, mean that there is a risk of really good teams not making it as far as they have the potential to in any one stage because of a bad day or a bad couple of games or, you know, whatever it is, whereas a double elimination bracket kind of fights against that a little bit more, and it gives teams the opportunity to make their way all the way to the end. I'm thinking back to COD champs at the end of 2019. I believe it was 100 Thieves who made it down into the losers bracket very early and then made it all the way to the end. I would have to check that because I could be really wrong, but those sorts of stories happen and they're great. Esports is all about having great stories, and it looks like Ubisoft are trying to set this league up so that they can allow that to thrive, but something like this does kind of put somewhat of a stunt to that, and I'm interested to see if, based on feedback they get, if they will be keeping that format. I would imagine it's been established internally for a little bit of time, so I would be very surprised if it did change, especially given as I think they said it would be May that the first qualifiers are going to happen, and well, it's already May. I think it's really cool that they're going to be having this for Canada as well. It will be running alongside NA, but the thing with the Canada division is I expect it to be a much lower skill ceiling, purely because I don't suspect that there is such a breadth of talent in Canada. At the very least, if there is, it's going to take a little while to build the team, synergize, get them to that same level, but the fact that it's available is really cool, especially as one thing that we have seen, and this is why franchise leagues come to be, and it's why it works in traditional sports as well, people are very, very invested in local teams. And obviously Rainbow Six is a Canadian game, and there's a big Canadian culture based around this game. SI is in Canada every single year, and so I think that there will be a pretty big fan base and a pretty big you know, opportunity for people to be more invested and get more involved in North America from the northern cousins, or I don't know how Americans refer to Canadians, but to us they're our Commonwealth babies. However, in the Canada division, there is of course going to be a little bit more of a bottom heavy style of things, because they will have 8 teams in Challenger League, but only 4 teams in the actual tier 1 division of things. But I think because it will be kind of a developing region, it'll be really interesting to see how much flip-flopping, how much changing that there's going to be going on in there, and we might see a very fast development of the scene because there are going to be fewer spots available for those teams, so it'll be a lot harder to kind of cling onto a spot or be grandfathered in, so to speak. So I think that that will be really interesting, but I do suspect that the US division is going to have a lot higher skill ceiling, and when it comes to the end of the year and there are those you know, fights out for like the SI spot, for example, it will probably be leaned more towards the US. Either way, I think it'll be really interesting to see how the tier 2 plans are laid out for the other regions as well, but for now, I thought it'd be really interesting to share my thoughts on the NA ones, and I'm very, very excited to see how it's all going to materialize and actually work in practice, but I'm feeling positive. I'm feeling optimistic about the future of it. I think that it's really nice to see that Ubisoft haven't neglected it, and they don't look like they have any plans to. They look like they're putting a lot more work behind it to help build it up, and that's really, really important, because for a scene to flourish, for it to grow, thrive, and most importantly have some longevity to it, you need to be nurturing your tier 2 scene. You can't let it drop off and die. We've seen it happen in the other esports, and we're seeing certain controversies happen currently in other esports tier 2 scenes where players are leaving and teams are leaving because they don't see much of an incentive to stick around. And I think Ubisoft have put in a lot of stock of providing that incentive to tier 2 and even tier 3 Rainbow Six teams. So thank you guys so much for watching my video anyway. I hope you thought some of my opinions were interesting. Let me know what your thoughts are, if you agree or disagree with me, if I've maybe overlooked something, not considered something, or if I've shone a light on something you didn't think of. I don't know. I'm really excited. I'm super passionate about tier 2 esports. Obviously tier 1 is great, but like tier 2 is really like, that's the root. But thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe if you enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.